this video, I want to make a simple but important point. When thinking and writing about the art of the past, humans don't produce a perfect objective record of something that has happened. Rather, the way we look at the past always reflects our own concerns and interests, our biases and prejudices, and those of our times and places. The history of art history, or the history of writing about art, is revealing about our ways of being in the world just like art is. Let's review some of the key ideas that have been put forth and text about art that are relevant to the period that we are concerned with. The ideas of ancient Greek and Roman authors were important for the understanding of art during the Renaissance. The pursuit of beauty was considered by the ancients as the highest goal of art. This idea was inherited by the Renaissance, especially in Italy. This is a detail of a 16th century Italian painting by Titian, where he strives to paint ideal beauty. The goal of art would gradually change throughout the centuries for most artists, turning from beauty towards something that could express the experiences of real life. Ancient thinkers such as Socrates, Plato, Aristotle, and Cicero singled out specific qualities for praise, which influenced artists and writers in later centuries. Among them are harmony and proportion, fantasy, elegance, and vitality. The idea of organizing the art made during a long period of time as a progression that goes from less to more accomplished artists also comes from antiquity. It is first found in an encyclopedia by the Roman writer Pliny the Elder, titled Natural History. In Book 35, he included a history of ancient Greek painting, which was very influential during the Renaissance. Pliny wrote about the statue that is on the screen, the famous Laocoon. When in 1506 this statue was discovered in Rome, it was seen to have the signatures of the 3 sculptors that Pliny said had signed it. This gave him great credibility. Ancient ideas about art were given new impulse during the Renaissance. Giorgio Vasari, whose book The Lives of the Most Excellent Italian Architects, Painters, and Sculptors was first published in 1550, is probably the most quoted of all writers on the art of painting. On the screen is the cover page of his book. He organized the history of painting in Italy following a biological model, based on the idea that art, like living beings, is born, grows, ages, and dies. This model remained very influential. The most important contribution of Vasari, aside from the specific information that he provides on Renaissance painters, is the focus on the personal style of artists, on what made them different from each other, which was seen as the expression of their individual personalities. Distinguishing personal styles has remained a central concern for those who study art. Giulio Mancini, an Italian physician, wrote in the early 17th century that all persons have personal habits which they cannot hide even if they try to, and that they are visible in paintings, in areas such as how they paint the eyes, or the folds of draperies, or locks of hair. Attributing paintings and distinguishing originals from copies, workshop paintings or forgeries, and pictures of higher and lower quality has remained an important way to think about art ever since. This type of activity, the technique of identifying works of art based on visual analysis, and also when available on documents, is known as connoisseurship. The term comes from the verb to know in French. Nowadays, X-rays, infrared images of paintings, and chemical analysis of pigments can help identify and date paintings. The judgment of connoisseurs or art experts can seem arbitrary, and it is not exceptional to find charlatans that pose as connoisseurs. This is why they are ridiculed in this English caricature from the 18th century, where a man is carefully studying a black painting. During the 18th century, there was a tendency to move away from the biographies and the personalities of artists, and to focus on developments caused by what were viewed as inevitable forces conducting history. The most influential proponent of this was Winckelmann. He didn't only think of how to understand the evolution of art. Like Vasari and other writers before him, he couldn't resist making judgments of taste. In his case, he supported art that seemed close to classical antiquity, and he denigrated other styles. He anticipates the figure of the art critic, a person who gains our trust and on whom we defer our judgment about art. Art criticism can never be an entirely rational task, because there are no universal objective rules for judging or for producing quality or beauty in art. In the 19th century, art history became linked to museums and universities and was born as an academic discipline. This was a time of intense nationalism in Europe, when emphasis was placed on what made nations different. The history of art was organized along national schools, and museums showed art in ways that strengthened nationalistic points of view. Most museums still organize their collections in this way to some extent. It is important when you go to museums that you realize that paintings did not just fall onto the walls according to some natural order. They are organized as a result of decisions that emphasize certain things and not others. In museums with large international collections, for example, there's a tendency to privilege works by local over foreign artists, by displaying more of them, or by showing them more prominently. During the 19th and the early 20th centuries, some important concepts that had been hinted at in earlier writings were singled out as key ingredients in the interpretation of painting and their evolution. Formalism focuses on the formal language of art. It tries to make sense of the impression that forms have a life of their own, that they evolve autonomously from what they represent, following their own logic. Think of the Laocoon as abstract forms, and then imagine that they're subjected to heat and that they boil and change according to their own natural rules. You will get a sense that forms evolve according to their own logic, the idea that is at the heart of this way of seeing art. Another concept that gained importance in the 19th century was the idea that art reflects the spirit of a time. Think of this painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder, for example, as reflecting a generalized fear of violence and death as a determining factor in the mentalities of people from the time when it was made. The German term Zeitgeist is often used to describe this concept, because it was coined by German philosophers. Other problems that interested historians as the discipline of art history grew in the 19th and 20th century are the study of the context in which art is made and in which painters live and work, the phenomenon of the transmission of artistic styles, and the full range of meanings that paintings had when they were made. It was also during the late 19th and the early 20th centuries that credible catalogs of the works of many painters were compiled. This involved learning about who painted what and when. It was a colossal task at a time when reproductions were not as easily available as they are now, and when travel was more difficult. The process of cataloging works of artists is ongoing, as new tools and discoveries force the re-evaluation of past attributions. In the 1930s, and because of the rise of the Nazi regime, approximately 250 leading German and Austrian art historians, mainly of Jewish origin, left their countries to settle in the UK and the US. Because of this, universities and museums in those two countries have become the leading centers for the study of art history. Since the 1970s, there's a growing skepticism towards universal abstract categories and towards overarching historical narratives. And there's a growing awareness of the fact that history is varied and fragmented. This image expresses this beautifully. It is by a French illustrator, Guy Billou, and it shows the French-Algerian philosopher Jacques Derrida looking at his reflection in a pool. Derrida was the leading exponent of a current of thought known as deconstruction, which studies how meaning and knowledge are built, and which has been very influential in the field of art history, as in other areas of the humanities. The drawing explains Derrida's thought by affirming that the seamless, clear images of ourselves that we have projected onto the history of art, for example, do not reflect how complicated and fragmentary we and reality actually are. Art historians are now more aware of the variety of conditions under which art was made, and of the fact that different sectors of society have not been exposed and explored in equal measure by the history of art. Women artists are an example of this. Art history allows for as many interpretations as we're capable of coming up with. It's an amazing instrument for exploring the concerns of human beings and their ways of being in the world throughout the centuries. My own interest in different theories and methods has changed throughout the years. The preparation of this course has coincided with a time when I'm drawn to understand the magnetic power of art, the reasons why contemplating paintings can be a life-enhancing experience. Only direct contemplation of art can show this. You need to go to museums. The poet and essay writer Yves Bonnefoy has written that when confronted with mediocre art, he feels as if he has come to a meeting where the other person has not shown up. This, by contrast, helps us to understand the strong presence of art, how it pulls us in a nearly physical way. Think of the reasons why you're interested in art.